So we're going to cover the biotic metrics for the NMRAM montane riverine wetland version. And the biotic metrics that we have 5 of them. We have relative native plant community composition, vegetation horizontal patch structure, vegetation vertical structure, native riparian tree regeneration, and invasive exotic plant species cover. All of the metrics are, the rating for all the metrics is based off of mapping and reconnaissance that involves mapping the vegetation patches on your sample area map and then collecting data on a pair of worksheets that will then help you rate all the metrics. So once you've done the walkthrough with the map and gone through the whole site, you will have all the data you need to rate all 5 metrics. While you're doing that, you also want to confirm landscape metrics. When you're at the edges of the sample area, you want to check your landscape metric ratings. And if you notice anything, you would, hopefully the biotic team and the abiotic team will communicate, because it's always possible the biotic team will run into something that they want to bring to the attention of the abiotic team member or vice versa. So how do you do this patch mapping? So the patch map that you're making, this is what a finished one will look like. At the end of the day, you're going to have mapped all the patches of vegetation within your sample area and assigned them to community types and collected data relevant to the metrics that we're going to, all the 5 metrics. And so each patch is determined by the community type. So a patch would be you are standing in a cottonwood forest and you walk out and now you're in a grassy meadow, or you're in a shrubland, or you change from a cottonwood forest to a conifer forest or some other species. So that's what determines the patches. And the patches have to make a certain minimum size. You wouldn't map a tiny little patch. Anything that's less than 100 square meters doesn't count. It's just an inclusion. And to make the botany as friendly as we can, we don't want to make your lives too difficult with botany, you're only going to have to record 6 species at most for each patch. And that's the 2 most common tall woodies. And tall woodies, we're not making you worry about whether they're trees technically or shrubs technically. Just are they 20 feet tall or taller? That's a tall woody. If they're under 20 feet tall and woody, short woody. And then we have an herbaceous category. And in herbaceous goes all the grasses and forbs, anything that doesn't have a woody stem. And at most, you're recording 2 species for each of those strata. So tall woody, short woody, herbaceous. And how are you going to record that data? So we're on slide 5. So first, you have your sample area map that you're going to start. You're going to walk into your first, you get to your site, right? You get there, you've got your sample area map. You look around, you walk into your site. So here we have this example of polygon, the first polygon. What's polygon 1? It's just the first place you walked into. There's no magic to what polygon 1 has to be on the sample area map. It's just the first polygon you've gone into. In this case, our field person walked off the road, and they are standing in polygon 1. And so they start to sketch that on the map. A lot of times you won't have the whole boundary figured out until you've walked all the way through the site. But you sketch in the boundaries as you go. And the first thing you're standing in, you're going to describe. I'm standing in polygon 1. What is polygon 1? Well, first you go to your worksheet 5, which is also here on. And on worksheet 5, you're going to record all your polygon data. And so you get a structure type. I'm going to tell you more about the structures types, but you assign a vertical structure type. In this case, the polygon 1 was a cottonwood forest, and that's with a grassy understory, and that's structure type 2. Then you also have how much tree regeneration, if any, native tree regeneration. In this case, there was 1% native tree regeneration. And you also record if there are any noxious, exotic, invasive, noxious weeds, and what percentage cover they have. In this case, there weren't any in this polygon. If there had been some, you would record the species codes in the next column that allows you to record species code. And finally, you're going to put in a comment. In the comments, you're going to fill in a very short word picture. What does this place look like? And it's going to help you later when you're looking at your data. And it will help anyone else who looks at your data. And sometimes even in the field, if you have a very big site with a lot of different patches, it's really helpful to have this just short picture of what this place was that you were standing in. In this case, our field technician has written higher terrace with mature cottonwood and dense smooth brome understory. Smooth brome is a common non-native grass. And so that gives you a good picture. You can picture, oh, cottonwoods with a lot of this grass. Okay, got it. And that's all it has to be. It doesn't need to be complicated. So that's how you do your first polygon data. Once you've got that data sheet filled in, you also have to fill in worksheet 6, which is the community the Relative Native Plant Community Worksheet. And it's basically you're tracking your community, what the dominant species are for that polygon. And so for our example site, we're on page 6, our example site is that cottonwood dominated tall woody. And so we fill in on our species. We notice that we have columns for tall woody species, short woody species, and herbaceous, and we have 2. You can list 2 species for each of those. You don't have to list 2 species. In this case, all there was in the tall woodies was cottonwoods. And so there's cottonwoods listed. You give whether it's a native or an exotic species. And then on the herbaceous, you have 2 species listed, 2 different grass species, smooth brome and Kentucky bluegrass, which are both considered exotic in New Mexico. If you're using the activated PDF data sheets, which hopefully you are, as soon as you fill in the species code, it will automatically tell you whether it's native or exotic, unless you don't know what the species is. And then it will assume, you should assume that if you don't know the species, that it's exotic. But you can put in unknown. And the species codes are built into those data worksheets for most of the common species in the state. But if you run into a species that's not on the list, you can get all of the codes for every species in the country on the USDA plants website, which is maintained by the USDA. So once you've got your species filled in, you've got whether they're native or exotic, then you have the final, or the third column from the end, under the CT score, you'll see that it says raw. The raw CT score is assigned based on whether you decided those plants were native or exotic, not whether you decided whether they were native or exotic. And I will tell you how we assign those CT scores in a little bit, but it will be a value from 1 to 4, because remember, everything in the NMRAM rates up to 1, 2, 3, 4, A, B, C, D. And so these CT raw scores are a value between 1 and 4 based on, we determined whether we thought, based on the different combinations of native and exotic, and whether that is a more native dominated or a more exotic dominated. So in this case, because we have a native tree, we have a 3.5 for the raw score, because the tree, as the big dominant in the stand, pulls the weight even though the grasses are exotic. And then you also put in the percentage area of your sample area that you think your polygon represents. So in this case, we put in 45%. And don't agonize about this. This is rapid assessment. If you think it's 40%, that's fine. All you have to do is make sure at the end of the day, your whole sample area, all the polygons that you recorded, and all the community types you recorded come up to 100% of the sample area. It can't be 99%, can't be 105%. And so that sample area weighting, or the size weighting of the sample area is very important. You'll notice it's in decimals. And it has to be, it doesn't have to be super exact, but it does, make your best estimate. And then the 2 scores, the raw score and the sample percent area, are multiplied to get your weighted raw score. And at the end of the day, that weighted raw score is going to get added up, and again, it will fall as a number between 1 and 4, depending on how native or exotic dominated your stands are. Let's do one more polygon so you can see how we work our way through the site, and then I'll show you what happens at the end when you roll it up. So you're walking through your site, you've walked through site polygon 1, and the next thing you come to is the channel. Well, in this case, the channel has a lot of herbaceous wetland veg growing in it, and it became our polygon 2 for this example site. So you get there and you're looking around. You got to give it a structure type. In this case, it got 6W, which is herbaceous wetland. You give it a tree regeneration percent. In this case, there was no tree regeneration observed along the channel, so it got a 0 there. And it did have noxious weeds, had 0.5% noxious weeds according to our field technician. And those were Canadian thistle and bull thistle. And those, you can see on the data sheet that she's filled in the codes from the USDA plant website for those 2 noxious species. And then our word picture again. So it's a channel with watercress and unknown aquatic F3 banks, mostly herbaceous. So what happens when you have a species you don't recognize? You're out in the site and you're like, I just don't know what that is. Okay, that's fine. You don't have to know every plant. Nobody does. But if you feel like it's a stand dominant, it's really common in your stand, you need to take a picture of it if you can, and you need to collect it if at all possible. And you should have in your field kit little sticky tags, and on that sticky tag you're going to write what sample area, the date, your initials, the polygon it came from, the community type, and then a code that you assign in the field, which is very simple. It's basically Forb 1 or Forb 3 if it's the third one you've collected that day. Or if you have an unknown shrub, it would be Shrub 1. And you will just put that sticky tag on there and make sure you collect either the whole plant if it's a small herbaceous plant, or enough of the plant that includes some leaves or fruits if they're available, if it's like a piece of a shrub. And you're going to press that and bring it back to your friendly neighborhood botanist, and they will help you figure out what you have. But in the meantime, page 8, you're going to just fill in on your worksheet. You can see on polygon, or on community type B, you can see from the field we've got this Forb 2. That's our unknown Forb. So that Forb 2, it doesn't really matter what code you use as long as you use a coding system that makes sense to you. But you're going to fill in some sort of code on the code sheet, on the species list, and make sure that's on your label, because that's how you're going to get back and fix your data sheet later with the correct plant ID. In the meantime, we're still on polygon 2, and we're filling in our community worksheet. And we have watercress as our first most common herbaceous. Remember, there were no tall woodies, no short woodies. And so you're just going to fill in that species 2. And you've got watercress, which is a native. And then we have this unknown plant. So an unknown Forb will calculate in the raw community type score as an exotic. So we have a raw score of 2, which is what you get when you have equal dominance of native and non-natives. And then for the percentage area on this particular site, that's not all, even though the channel runs through the whole sample area, it's not a lot of area, so we estimated it as 10%. Again, if I wanted to be super picky, I'd be like, well, maybe it's really 12%, but this is rapid assessment. Don't spend your day trying to figure out if it's 10% or 12%. It's going to average out in the end of the day and be fine. And then you multiply those two together to get your weighted score of 0.2%. So you're going to continue through your site, walking around the whole sample area. And when you get through the whole sample area, you're going to have a finished map. I'm going to actually use this example here. And this is a finished polygon map for our sample area. You can see all the polygon boundaries. If you were in the field, the drawn map would look very much like this. We usually use just Sharpies on a printed out map that the people take out in the field. And you've drawn the boundaries, and you're going to put numbers on each polygon that correspond with what's on worksheet 5. And then all of those polygons that you collected data on also get assigned to a community type. Now, you don't have to have a separate community type for every polygon. So if you look at worksheet 6 on the finished example, you can see that on community type C, we've assigned 4 polygons to the community type. What that means is as the technician was walking through the site, they got to a different patch and it was separated. And this is colored so you can see where the different community types are. So green was one community type, purple was one community type, blue was one community type, and yellow was one community type. And what happens is you can get the same exact community type, but it's separated by a different polygon. And so 3 and 4 are separate polygons because they're divided by a different community type between them. But they go to the same the 3, 4, 5, and 7 all ended up being assigned to the same community type because they had the same dominance. They all had willow shrublands with a wetland carex and a grass. And so it gets, as you work through your site, things get easier and easier because a lot of times as you work through a site, you might have, obviously the first patch and the second patch would be different from each other. And then the third patch may be a repeat of the first patch, you never know. And so as you work through the site, it goes faster and faster during the day. And then at the end, you're going to have your filled in map, your filled in worksheet 5, and your filled in worksheet 6. And you're going to be ready to roll up all your scores.